Video games have been a part of my life for as long as I can remember. When my husband and I found out we were expecting, I couldn't wait to share the news that a player 3 was joining our party. As we dreamed about the day she could play her first video game with us, I couldn't help but remember what it was like growing up as a female gamer. Because games were never really marketed to me. They were marketed to this guy. But that didn't stop me. There were always consoles around my house growing up. My siblings recently reminded me that I got my start with controllers that were never actually plugged in. Most of the games I remember playing as a kid were family games like Mario, Duck Hunt, and Paperboy. But there were also games that were a little less than tasteful for a kid like me. Games like Resident Evil 2. I remember thinking how awesome it was that I could play as a female character who was actually a badass and not some damsel in distress or a bikini babe. Up until then, most girls in other games were hypersexualized with unrealistic body types. A pretty iconic example of this is Tomb Raider's Lara Croft. Gaming took a step in the right direction by including playable female characters. But unfortunately, these women often had clothing options that showed more skin than their male counterparts. But that doesn't really reflect what the average female gamer looks like. If you ask me, I think she might look a little more like this. My personal feelings of being under or misrepresented in the games that I play isn't my only takeaway from these experiences. Not only did I fall in love with their storytelling, game design, and influential soundtracks, I also remember learning one of life's most valuable lessons, learning how to lose. Whether it was Street Fighter against my brother or seeing that old gravestone in Oregon Trail, I learned how to deal with that frustration. I would keep trying in order to get better. I learned that the only way to improve at anything, not just video games, was through practice and failure. But not everyone is good at losing, especially when playing against someone online. After someone notices the sound of my voice or that I'm using a female avatar in a game, I can't tell you how many messages I receive telling me I must be fat or ugly if I'm a female gamer, or sending unwelcomed advances and harassment. Now imagine walking into this room. It smells exactly like it looks. You can see the Dorito dust settling into a cloud of farts. It was in rooms like this that I learned how to balance my own femininity while having to be one of the guys. Now, it's one thing to be in a physical space like this when it's your own friends giving you a hard time, but it's a completely different experience when you're playing online in a digital room with a group of random guys. Imagine being the first girl these guys have ever played a game against. Now imagine beating a group of those same guys in a competitive game. You can imagine that that loss is not well received. I always felt like I had to win in order to prove that I deserved a seat at the table. It was hard enough to convince these people that I should be allowed to play, but it was another thing to convince them that I could be just as good, if not better, than they were. This competitive nature led me down a path of having to justify my skills or abilities. I'm constantly having to prove that I'm a worthy adversary. Combating this kind of verbal and online harassment isn't easy. It starts by calling out your friends when they make those harmless comments, thinly veiled as jokes, or by reporting users who participate in hateful behavior. But video games aren't always about competition or social interaction. It's also about improving your hand-eye coordination and your reaction time. A few years ago, my husband and I were driving down a snowy highway. After hitting an icy rumble strip, he swerved back on the road, spinning into a 180, facing a semi-truck head-on. Before I could finish screaming, he whipped the car back around and had us safely on the shoulder of the road. The first thing out of his mouth, thank God for video games. Now, I'm not saying that all video games can save your life. Other games embrace storytelling in a way that books or movies simply cannot do. By playing as an active participant in these stories, you can make moral and ethical decisions that translate to helping you become a better person, making decisions, better decisions in your own life. Playing video games with my husband and our friends is one of my favorite things to do. But maybe playing a video game has never even crossed your mind. Maybe you didn't play when you were a kid because games weren't marketed to you. Maybe you heard stories of harassment and you didn't want to face it yourself. Or maybe you were just afraid to lose. I want to encourage you to open your mind and try something new. There are so many great games out there, and I want to tell you about a few that might get you interested. Games like Rocket League. It's basically soccer with cars. It encourages good sportsmanship by equipping users with pre-made phrases to share, like, great shot, or nice pass. With simple mechanics and easy-to-learn controls, it's a fun game for a new gamer to give a shot. Or maybe you don't want to play with other people, and you just want to play a game to unwind or spend time alone. In a game called Life is Strange, you play as a female teenager making tough decisions in a beautifully cinematic game that feels more like watching a movie. Don't want to play yourself? Hand the controller to a friend and watch this episodic story unfold together. Or maybe you find yourself wishing you could connect with your gamer kids. Pick up the controller and give Minecraft a try. You can sharpen your creativity, your collaboration, your logical problem solving while basically playing digital Legos in an open world where the only limit is your imagination. And games can also be an educational experience in disguise. They can teach our kids how to count, how to learn their colors, or learn the letters of the alphabet. Games have come a long way since I was a kid, but we're not there yet. Unfortunately, it's still tough to be a female gamer. The gap is closing, but we're still a minority. Just telling you about my experiences and how I've continued to play despite setbacks isn't really why I'm here tonight. I want to do my part to create a world where someone like my daughter Lily can pick up any game she'd like without fear of judgment of who she is. And for me, that starts tonight. Add my username on PS4, and I'd be happy to walk you through any of these games or talk to you about how to get started. Because when more women play games, more women will make games, and more real women will be represented in games. Because the more female gamers we have, the more inclusive our spaces will be. Thank you.